Well, Rivers State Chief Judge Justice Simeon Amadi says he cannot at the moment act on the resolution of the State House of Assembly requesting him to constitute a panel to investigate the allegations of misconduct against the state governor, Sim Fubara, and Deputy Governor Ngozi Odu. Justice Amadi, in a letter to the Speaker of the Rivers State House of Assembly, acknowledged receiving the House's resolution to set up a 7-man impeachment panel against the governor. He, however, said he is restrained by a subsisting High Court order from taking any action. Justice Amadi recalled the interim court order from a suit by Governor Fubara and Professor Odu challenging the impeachment process over alleged improper service of notice.
In that order, Justice Fubara temporarily restrained the Speaker and 27 other defendants from sending any request, resolution, articles of impeachment, or other document or communication to the Chief Judge. In addition, the Chief Judge pointed out that the Speaker has lodged an appeal against the interim order at the Court of Appeal. He says he is therefore legally disabled at this point to exercise his duties under the Constitution to act on the request from the House of Assembly.
Now it's time for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning with Arise On 001, Dr. Constance Ikoku, as always.
Good morning, Benga.
Good morning, Dr. Constance.
Arise On producer 001. Since you're a producer too, 001 producer.
No, you know, we can all feel the energy when it comes to the newspaper segment.
Yes.
Yeah? I remember the musician always said, energy, energy, energy.
All right, good morning, Yolanda. How are you today?
Good morning, Dr. Constance. I'm glad it's Friday.
Yeah, it's Friday. Yes, everyone is glad. So exhausted.
Thank God it's Friday.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's time to take a break and rest. Hello there and welcome to the program. We'll be looking at the stories that are shaping the agenda for you today. Let's kick off with this day newspaper. Top themes in today's papers include security, crisis, and mass abductions, military rescue operations, and government leadership moves in regard to ambassadors, among others. This day leads with the crisis in Rivers State. The Chief Judge explains why the impeachment process against Governor Fubara and his deputy Odu has to stop, claiming his hands are tied. In regard to security, U.S. Undersecretary asked Nigeria to do more to protect Christians. President Tinubu announces incentives to unlock jobs, forex inflows from Shell's Bonga Southwest, and others. Leadership fronts coordinated attacks on churches in Wali, Kaduna State, with abductees' locations identified, and the Arawa Consultative Forum saying that amnesty for bandits will not work. Kano APC tells Governor Abba Yusuf that they've reserved 001 slot for him in the party's e-registration exercise, so he stopped there. Delhi Independent Shell eyes $20 billion investment in Nigeria after successful $7 billion deal. 2027, Hakim Baba Ahmed counsels Atiku not to run for president as a sacrifice. New Telegraph, President Trump declares that U.S. forces are wiping out terrorists in Nigeria. And Kudirat Abiola trial, Supreme Court dismisses Major Al-Mustafa's trial. And hunger crisis, World Food Program to cut food aid to 1 million Nigerians as funds dry up. The apprehension over 50% pay rise for pilots is on as airlines stakeholders defer on price hike. The Punch reports that the U.S. has demanded action on the abductions in Kaduna as federal government promises to track abductors, to track them. Vanguard writes about Governor Seyi Makinde's meeting with President Tinubu, after which he declared that he's comfortable in PDP. Finally, federal government disburses 152 billion naira to contractors following Abuja protests. This is part of the 4 trillion naira owed contractors. Daily Sun has gone with President Tinubu posting 4 ambassador designates to France, US, UK, and Turkey. Vice President Shettima presents Nigeria's food security plan in Davos. As Tinubu okays oil drilling at Waterside, Olokolo deep sea port to take off, according to Governor Abiodun. Let's move to the international headlines, beginning with the Times. A key theme across multiple broadsheets, including the Times and Daily Mail, is the potential return of Andy Burnham to Parliament after Labour MP Andrew Gwyn's planned resignation, which could trigger a by-election and open a route for Burnham to challenge Sir Keir Starmer for Labour leadership. But Starmer allies are reportedly moving to block his candidacy, reflecting internal party divisions. The Daily Telegraph highlights that around 4.5 million people may not vote in May's local elections after some Tory-controlled councils were approved to delay polls, provoking criticism about democratic accountability. Daily Express front page features campaigners pushing for better mental health support within the forthcoming National Cancer Plan. Daily Mirror leads with international political commentary from Donald Trump about British troops, which has angered bereaved families. Daily Star has lighter coverage about Brooklyn Beckham and Nicola Peltz amid family feud of the Beckhams. The Guardian leads with Ukraine and President Zelensky's fiery speech at the World Economic Forum, urging Europe to stand up for itself. Metro.co.uk highlights the first images of President Trump's reborn Gaza tourist vision with headline, Gaza or Gaga. Now let's break down what these stories mean for everyday citizens. This day newspaper again. The Chief Judge of Rivers State, Justice Simeon Chibuzo Amadi, has refused to constitute a 7-member panel to probe Governor Fubara and his deputy over allegations of gross misconduct. The reason that he offered is that there are subsisting court orders and interim injunctions from a high court restraining him from receiving, considering, or acting on any request or resolution from the State House of Assembly. Opinions are divided on this, Benga. On the one hand, the Chief Judge is seen as a legal professional who understands the implications of disobeying court orders. On the other hand, critics say the courts are interfering in political matters, and this is way too much.
Indeed, very interesting times ahead. We discussed this a couple of days ago when we highlighted the possible potential stumbling blocks and bottleneck in the road to this impeachment. And this is informed by Section 188, subsection 5. That is after the plenary, after the House of Assembly, the Rivers House of Assembly has concluded that indeed there was a need to probe this offense of this allegation of impeachment. A written notice is sent to the Chief Judge of the state to constitute a 7-man panel. And now we talked about the process of appointment of the Chief Judge of the state. And this process highlights a key role of the governor. So most likely the Chief Judge is likely to have a strong allegiance to the governor. But now they have run into some quagmire because it has both legal and political implication now. Because one, the defendant had filed an interim injunction in which Justice Fubara presided on at the Rivers High Court, where there was an interim injunction for the 31 members of the House of Assembly not to proceed on any, or not to, or for the Chief Judge, as Justice Amadi, not to accept any document on that impeachment plot. That's one. And also, the River Speaker had also run into that trap by filing an appeal. Yes. So this doctrine is called lispendence in law, which means a pending suit. So as a professional judge, the Chief Judge has a right to obey that doctrine of lispendence, which means a pending suit or a pending appeal. Right. So that is one. Then two, we look at that situation where the situation captures a potential allegiance to the governor. So when you look at this, it speaks of very interesting times ahead. We can only watch and see how the two factions, how they manage this tightrope. But above that, we need to prioritize governance of the people. This is being relegated to this backstage, and it has placed Rivers State in a state of uncertainty for almost a year now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this effectively halts the impeachment process, at least for now.
Absolutely.
The chief judge is a judicial officer himself. He knows the law and he understands the process. And in light of that, everyone can see his point of view when he says that he is legally bound by the law, pending determination of the suit that was filed. So what will follow from this is the rule of law versus political pressure on him, because this is a hot case for Rivers State. The Assembly and Minister Nyesom Wike very eager to see the back of Governor Fubara and his deputy. And so we'll have to see how these legal safeguards will either slow the impeachment or the political pressure takes over. So, but beyond the legal technicality here, the standoff exposes that power struggle between all the factions within Rivers State, and how we're seeing a proxy battle within the State House of Assembly against the governor. But all this is also happening while the governor seems to be entrenching himself in the All Progressives Congress, his new party that he has decamped to from the PDP. We saw that in a couple of days ago, there was a committee that was set up by the APC. He was reported to have joined leaders of the party at the inaugural meeting of the APC Committee on Strategy, Conflict Resolution and Mobilization that is aimed at addressing disputes within the party. So Governor Fubara has now become one of those that is trying to address internal disputes within the party. So the committee is chaired by the governor of Yobe State, Mai Malabuni, and includes several governors, Kaduna State, Ubasani, Umar Namadi Jigawa, Hope Uzodinma, Imo State, Hyacinth Alaya, Benue State, Cross River, and a host of them. So it seems to be gaining some ground while these people are trying to remove the carpet from under his feet in his home state.
Let's not forget that the Rivers State the Rivers State APC is deeply enmeshed in, it's deeply fragmented.
It is.
It's factionalized, so there's a lot of uncertainty hovering around that issue.
Definitely. Let's stay with this day newspaper. In regards to security, U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs Alison Hooker has arrived in Nigeria as part of a multi-country tour spanning Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The trip underscores Washington's renewed focus on security, starting from Nigeria. She has asked Nigeria to do more to protect Christians. This is coming on the heels of that mass abduction in Kaduna State. And this visit sees a strengthening of diplomatic, security, and economic engagement with the U.S. Yolanda, the U.S. driving down on that protection of Christians, but it's also protection of everybody because everyone is affected by the mass abductions.
Absolutely. As long as you are a Nigerian living in certain states that have these high rates of terrorism, you are definitely affected. And from the report that we took earlier, you would see that it was a very well attended discussion. We saw the Minister of Defense, we saw Nuhu Ribadu, we saw a lot of big wigs at that event, that discussion. So it was very good to see that they are really putting action to the discussions that were made in the US before, when they said that they would come and look at this framework and how they would do things. On the other hand, we also need to look at the fact that Nigeria is also trying to hold the United States accountable and responsible to what they said they would do. The report we had earlier as well mentioned that we have been asking for the weaponry, for the intelligence, for all the things that they said that they would do. So, I'm not sure if those were all the details that were released, but really that sense of accountability is quite high. We need to know when can we receive these weapons? When can we even saw a first dispatch, I believe, some weeks ago. We were not told what was inside it. We just had the visuals of, these things being dropped off. But we need to have some accountability and to move swiftly so that this doesn't keep prolonging later into the year as we are approaching the elections as well.
All right. Leadership newspaper, 35 million Nigerians risk hunger, UN warns. This number includes 3 million children facing severe malnutrition. The foreign-led aid model is no longer sustainable, says the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria, Mohammed Malik Fall. Funds are drying up globally, and conditions in conflict-hit areas in the northeast, whether it's Borno, Yobe, Adamawa, it continues with violence. More than 4,000 people were killed in the first 8 months of last year, and that matches the total number in 2023. And so now the UN says it cannot afford to continue to deliver the level of aid it used to. Meanwhile, in Davos, we saw the report that Vice President Kashim Shettima launched Nigeria's food security plan called Back to Farm, meant to resettle displaced farmers, providing agricultural inputs, insurance, and access to capital to restart food production. Brenda, let me come to you. He says the government no longer sees this as just a security problem, but as a macroeconomic and governance issue. All this displacement continuing, for millions have far-reaching consequences. And on most front pages today, they also covered that Kaduna abductions.
Yeah, coming from the UN humanitarian coordinator, Malik Fall, he says that this is not just a statistics.
No, it's not, yes.
It's about life, it's about the future, and it's about Nigerians. I think this is coming from the shrinking supplies of aids from the World Food Program that started last year. The alarm was sent last year. How has the Nigerian government responded to this crisis? That would be a question of posterity and a question of accountability to the Nigerian government responding to this issue, because now the UN has announced that it only has the capacity to deliver $560 million, and that will mean that the recipients or the beneficiaries of this will shrink from 3.5 million to 2.5 million. So
3.6 million.
Okay, okay, 3.6 million to 2.5 million. So that is a huge deficit, a huge gap. And he also specifically pointed at what's happening, the violence particularly in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe, that this is a crisis point that the government needs to focus on. So how much have we responded to these issues will also be a question of posterity that our government will need to be held accountable on. I think that already we have about 140 million Nigerians in the poverty basket, but now he is saying that we have about 35 million Nigerians living below that trapped in the hunger.
Facing severe hunger,
severe hunger. So this has exceeded the poverty line. It's now excruciating hunger, and this is very, very, very disturbing.
So you've hit the nail on the head, both your sentiments. And yesterday, ironically, I was at the UN House when Mohammed Fall was speaking about a lot of these facts. But there's another important contributing factor that we have to look into. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'd like to touch again on the CPC, because ever since it came into play, we had these major NGOs scaling down on their, on their programs in Nigeria. And this has also had a greater impact on how it affects the greater population, especially the people who are facing malnutrition in the northeast, especially these bay areas, as it's mostly called, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe state. So these bay states are really suffering the most and getting the hardest hits, and that is also because projects are decreasing in Nigeria because of this CPC designation. And as well, Dr. Constance, I know you're going to touch later on this, but all these things that are coming up to challenge the efforts of the UN, such as this Board of Peace, all these things that are causing the UN to kind of minimize the work that they're doing. It wasn't meant to be something that was supposed to be run for eventuality. It was supposed to be a stopgap measure, but unfortunately, we find ourselves being so reliant on this assistance and aid that we're not able to stand on our feet without it.
Well, the first thing to note is that global funds are collapsing. Global fund aid is collapsing. And so there are pros and cons to these funds drying up. One, it forces nations to go off aid and become more responsive, responsible and accountable to their citizens, which means that response must go beyond food aid alone to addressing the root causes of these displacements that we are seeing every day. Secondly, this may take a while, especially for nations that are heavily dependent on aid. There are many African countries that even their budget is funded by aid. So it may take a while, where, countries that are unable or unwilling to respond to this hunger and humanitarian crisis, the consequences will be dire because it will spill quickly and, amount to maybe state instability for many countries. You might see unrest, higher levels of insecurity. We see the number of children and parents that are in the streets in Abuja today.
Yes.
Most of these kids and their parents are running or have run from conflict-prone zones within the country,
100%.
and they're lying about. And all these kids that you're seeing, it has major consequences. Children that are not in school today are going to become your criminals tomorrow, and they're going to be the ones terrorizing your communities, terrorizing what is the capital cities in the rural areas, becoming insurgents, becoming bandits. So this is a real serious crisis that we are facing. So the vice president in Davos talking about Nigeria launching that program to tackle food security. Yeah, okay, it's gonna on paper to launch it. However, it is no longer about talk. These are serious crises that has to be followed through immediately. You hear them talking about reforms, how it is, improving the economy, but we have this other part where it is completely almost out of control. So
very true.
It's crunch time, and it's time for us to move quickly. There's another story here, if we can take that quickly. The Punch newspaper is an inside page story with Wike dragging FCT workers to court. It says the workers of the FCTA have been on indefinite strike since Monday, and the minister is seeking an order restraining the unions and their agents from engaging in picketing, obstruction, lockouts, or any action directed to the claimants, department heads, and political appointees. Unions were accused of blocking roads, shutting down offices, and disrupting the smooth running of the FCT administration. This is new for a minister taking his workers, FCT minister taking his workers to court. It's never happened before.
Yeah, in the midst of having Hobson's choice, I think that might be the only option left for him, because the FCT is a very critical part of the country, and it's also unfortunate that he has allowed this situation to drag to this crucial point, to this critical stage. That's a minus for him, because some of the allegations are very germane, actually, because they have accused the FCT administration of extending the tenures of senior officers, directors, permanent secretaries that will now stifle the career progress of and though they have responded, the administration of the FCT has responded that they would stop all this, but is that enough to address this crisis? Because stopping all this means that those that have benefited will be in deficit of some years, and they may never, and there's what is called concurrent growth in the civil service, in such that some group of people, like 10, 20, might be in the same level at the same time. So someone holding on to that position has hindered the growth of about 20 people. So it has this multiplicity effect in the entire structure and the well-being of an institution. So I think that as a matter of urgency, the FCT minister should take a second look at the plight of these people, find a political solution, but the court is one of those options now, because we can't just allow a critical sector as the FCT administration to continue to go on strike continuously. This should not be allowed. This should be discouraged with all sense of responsibility.
I mean, the strike is a legitimate tool for workers to sort of protest. It provides a leverage for them to push home their demands, whatever it is, on conditions of service and the rest of them. So the minister, by taking them to court, is trying to assert his authority.
Absolutely.
And it can also be considered as a political messaging to the civil servants, meant to intimidate them, bring them into submission. So it's a hardline approach that he is taking. And that Minister Nyesom Wike has that image of a strong man. And we clearly see that that's what he's trying to do here. But there are risks to this, because he's trying to criminalize legitimate labor grievances rather than trying to resolve them through dialogue.
Yeah, but under the labor law, going to the court is one of the recognized options. So I think it's still a civil option.
Their rights. They're within their rights.
So both of them are within their right to have a fair hearing on this issue.
Okay, to the international headlines, President Donald Trump unveils his Gaza Board of Peace in Davos, an international body that he would chair. It was launched with a signing ceremony for its charter that he says can help enforce ceasefires and drive post-conflict reconstruction, starting with Gaza, but potentially expanding to other global crises. We know that the initiative invited countries with a controversial $1 billion fee for permanent membership. Yolanda, 35 countries have joined. Is this merely signaling, power, or is this about substance? Because we know that he wants to almost take on the job of the United Nations and multilateral institutions.
Dr. Constance, it seems a little more than power at this point. With a $1 billion, membership fee, one has a lot to think about. And, it's kind of ironic to hear this stated as the Board of Peace, because in the past few months, Donald Trump has been pretty hostile in his takeover of and his addressing of certain countries. We've seen this with Venezuela, we've seen it with South Africa, we've seen it with Greenland as well, recently, and many others. We've also seen this with Nigeria when he threatened to, come out guns a-blazing. So it's very shocking to see this, and very few details have been given about the mandate of this board, what they're going to be doing, and how the panel will work. But I think everybody is kind of just waiting and watching with a bated breath, because I don't think anybody wants to set off President Donald Trump at this point, because everyone is pretty much on their toes, walking on eggshells, because they just are uncertain of what moves he would make.
Yeah, I think you rightly said that it leaves a huge uncertainty in the international arena.
Absolutely.
Because now we have about 2 countries that have declined the invitation. The essence of this Board of Peace initially was to take over as the second phase of the Gaza reconstruction. But now it's saying that they are going to be in charge of global conflict in every part of the world. That will be running parallel with the United Nations.
No, it says starting first of all in Gaza and see how it goes.
Then now
he's
possibly speaking, but it looks more like an international structural ambush. And who Trump is. He would not stop within the lines.
He's not in favor of multilateral institutions. He doesn't care for United Nations. He's withdrawn the US from the World Health Organization. So he's
like stifling one to make another one thrive.
He's walking his talk. That's what he's doing.
That's right.
All right. Those were your headlines for today.
All right. Thank you so much. You're watching.